Hi YouTube, this is Evie. Welcome back to my channel, and today I have another video for you all. Today we're going to be talking about masochism. Now earlier this week I did a video with Brittany Simon, which if you guys haven't seen, links down in the description, where I interviewed her as a masochist. Now we're really good friends, so we talk about way more than just BDSM obviously, but she is a masochist, and we talked about, her journey as a masochist, how to get started in BDSM as a masochist, how to do it safely, all that good stuff. And I wanted to just follow up with that video with something that was like very basic, kind of just a general overview of masochism as a whole, rather than necessarily talking about somebody's personal experience. We're going to be talking about what masochism is, but we're also going to be talking about some misconceptions about masochism. We're going to be talking about different types of masochism. We're going to be talking about how do you discover if you are a masochist, or can you become a masochist? And then we're going to talk about some different forms and ways that you can participate in masochistic. Now, like I said, first things first is what is masochism? Compared to a lot of other terms that fall under the BDSM umbrella, masochism is actually relatively simple to define. It basically means somebody who enjoys receiving purposeful pain in some way of some kind. Now, that's kind of a bit airy, and I'll get more into different types of masochism, like I mentioned a little bit later on in this video, but there are a ton of different types of masochism out there, but they really all revolve around pain. And likewise, sadism, the counterpart to masochism, enjoys the giving of purposeful pain of some kind to someone. Masochism makes up the SM portion of the BDSM acronym. In that way, it can function completely separately from all other kinds of BDSM. You can be purely a masochist. You can be somebody like a Spanko or a Spanky who are literally just into masochistic or sadistic spankings, and they don't do any bondage or power exchange or anything else. It's literally just about the pain, and that is perfectly okay. Way for a very long time that S&M was kind of one side of things and BD was one side of things, and eventually the two ended up being smushed together, but they weren't always naturally paired with each other the same way that they are today. In that vein, we're going to start going over some of the misconceptions about masochism. The first one is that you do not need to be a masochist to be into BDSM. You do not need to be a submissive to be in BDSM either, for that matter. Like I said, masochism is its own entirely separate thing, although it is definitely more common that a submissive type person will also be a masochist, but not all masochists are submissive. Not all submissives have to be masochists. They are completely separate ideas. You can enjoy giving pain, and you can enjoy receiving power from another person. You can enjoy getting power and then also receiving the sensations of pain. Totally okay, perfectly fine. It's uncommon, but it does happen, and you're not wrong or bad or a bad submissive, or it doesn't inherently make you a switch or anything else if you sort of cross the lines between masochism and submission in ways that maybe is not super common or not super talked about. So number two is masochism, like sadism, is not a mental illness. You are not bad or wrong or mentally ill or disturbed or any of a number of other terms that people use to try and lump people who are into BDSM into the crazy box. It is not the same thing as a pathological sadomasochism. That has its own definition, has its own set of characteristics that must be met before somebody can be clad as a pathological sadomasochist. I will link down below in the description box either a link to kind of explaining what the differences are, or the definition of what makes it pathological, or something like that down in the description if you guys want to read more. But just suffice to say, if you are a masochist or a sadist, you are not inherently mentally ill in any way whatsoever. And myth number three is you have to enjoy physical pain to be a masochist. You have to have a high pain tolerance to be a masochist. That is also not true. While physical masochism is the most common form of masochism, it is definitely not the only form of masochism. And even if you can only take, 2 swats on the butt, or if you can only take, 3 or 4 canes, that is perfectly okay. There are many, many other forms of masochism out there besides just the physical reaction. And that brings me to the next point of this video, which is different kinds of masochism. Like I said, there is physical masochism, which involves the enjoyment of physical pain. Generally, this is done through impact play, also known as pain play, in which the top or the sadist or the dom, whatever they want to be called, is performing some kind of painful act on the masochist or the bottom or what have you. This can be done a variety of ways. This can be done with caning, it can be done with spanking, it can be done with paddles, it can be done with rough body play, it could be with coconut rope, it could be with pressure points, it can be with any of a number of things. Basically, is it something that causes physical pain that somebody gets enjoyment out of? That would be physical masochism. There's also emotional masochism, which has to do more with humiliation and degradation. This is enjoyment of something that is causing you emotional pain or tearing you down as a person. So, for example, somebody can be an emotional masochist if they get really, really turned on by being called a dumb cunt or by being called a dirty whore or whatever. It was something that would typically be emotionally damaging for somebody to hear, but it elicits some kind of positive response in you or when you hear it or whatever. That would be classified as emotional masochism. There's also mental masochism, which is a little bit difficult for me to define, but I'm going to try and explain it like this. There's mental masochism is basically something that's causing you like mental anguish, like something like a mind fuck, which is where you are being subjected to a scene or the actions of the scene are meant to cause you a lot of mental distress. It could be something that's related to phobias that you have. It could be something where you're set up to do an impossible task. It could be something where you're forced to address a lot of failure. Like, for example, being given an exam for a subject you've never studied before in your life. It's basically something that causes a lot of mental pain and a lot of like anxiety and distress. That would be like mental masochism. And I'm sure there's a bunch of other types of masochistic play that I'm not even going to be able to get into in this video that weave between mental and physical and emotional. And these things can all go together or be separate or be more prevalent at some times and not others. And it can all be very, very specific. Just because you're a physical masochist doesn't mean you like all forms of physical play. Just because you're an emotional masochist doesn't mean you like all forms of degradation or humiliation. It is very, very specific to the person. And we will talk about that more later. So there's mental and physical and emotion and all sorts of things in between and things I've forgotten to mention, I'm sure. But if you are getting started in BDSM and it sounds appealing and you want to try it out, how do you know if you're a masochist? Some people will know from a very young age, either through experiences or fantasies, they're a masochist, even if they don't necessarily have a term for it. A lot of the people I know that, would be called heavy bottoms, people that do regular, very heavy, lasting, long, like SM focused scenes, a lot of them knew or had actions that correlated with masochistic acts back when they were younger. Like a lot of them did very rough play. They were into extreme sports, things that caused them a lot of adrenaline rushes, even if it was very physically demanding. They enjoyed it in some way, or they had somebody kind of like passively call them a masochist when they were like 12 or 13 or whatever. And then it turns out when they were adults, oh, yeah, actually, that all makes sense to me now. I don't really know how to describe it besides that, but sometimes you just know if you're a masochist. It's something that you hear the term and something clicks and you realize that all of these things that like happened previously to you or things that you've enjoyed when you were a kid that were a bit weird now suddenly make a lot of sense. A lot of times also when people are becoming sexually mature and they start experiencing sexual fantasies and what have you, a lot of times people will have masochistic fantasies or sadistic fantasies just either from watching porn or hearing about it or just even like spontaneously the idea somehow becomes linked in their brain with sexuality. Not all masochistic acts and not all masochists link their masochism with sexual acts. By the way, I forgot to mention that during the portion of this video. Masochism is in no way inherently sexual. There are a lot of different ways to enjoy pain. There are a lot of different ways to learn to enjoy pain that can be sexual. That is definitely very common. It can also just give you a very like elated like physical high from all the adrenaline. It can also like make you feel really like small and humble, and that can be really comforting and good for you. It can help you like cope with like other things that are going on in your life or kind of distract you from the outside world. There can be a ton of different reasons to be masochistic or enjoy masochistic forms of play, not all of which are sexual. Going back to the actual subject of this part of the video, if you don't know if you're a masochist, but you're interested in figuring out if you are, even if you've never had any masochistic fantasies or thoughts or anything in your life before, the best thing I can advise you to do is try. And trying is really scary, and trying is really difficult, and it can be really like emotionally overwhelming even to try it out or think about doing it. But what you can do, and this is what I recommend for anybody who wants to do anything in BDSM really, is to find a local dungeon, go to a tasting event or an orientation or a newbie night or something. I promise you there will be something, even if it's only every 3 months or every 6 months or whatever. There will be something. Go to one of those, and what you can do is you can do samplers. You can, find other people to play with. A lot of times there's also sort of an instructional period built into the events where you'll be able to try out different kinds of toys, learn how to use different kinds of toys. Take advantage of that and go to that, because that is a really, really safe, structured environment to try out masochism and submission and all other forms of BDSM without really putting yourself at a lot of risk. Also, a lot of times there will be instructors who go there who are literally just there to teach new bottoms or new tops how to do whatever kind of play they're interested in doing. So, for example, you could go to a taster and you could try spanking for the first time. You could also go to a pro dom. Sometimes at BDSM events that are more like club focused rather than like dedicated dungeons, we'll have somebody there who is a pro dom or even sometimes pro subs who are literally just there to do very like casual, thoroughly negotiated, but non-committal, no attachment, no like sort of personal connection scenes, strictly for people, one, who are new or people who don't want any of those connections with BDSM and they literally just want to feel the sensations. So definitely go and try that out. You really, really won't know until you try. You can think with all of your heart that you would just love nothing more to be spanked until your ass is bleeding, and then you can have a hand press your butt for the first time and you could start screaming. I have heard stories more than once about people who have built up this idea of like a masochistic fantasy in their head and they've wanted to be a masochist so badly, and then they just go all out the first time they do a scene because they're worried about not looking tough enough or not looking like a real submissive or a real masochist or whatever. And even during the warm up, they are just, screaming and they have to right away, and just don't do that. Set yourself up for success. If you're interested in trying play as a masochist, start out very small. Like I said, you can go to tasters. Even if you don't go to anything like that and you're negotiating for play with somebody that you've met in real life, that you've met at a munch or something, make sure they know what your experience level is. Be honest about the fact that you're new. Tell them what kinds of play that you like. Fill out a yes, no, maybe list. Kind of just give a brief overview of the things you think you might like, and then just start out with like 5 spankings or 2 hits with the cane or 10 minutes with the flogger or whatever, just any combination of that. Or you could have people, while they're doing that, if you know you like certain kinds of pain, like let's say for example you know you like light spankings, to add other forms of masochism on top of that. Like maybe you want to try being humiliated while it's happening. Maybe you want to try something that's kind of a bit more of a mind fuck. Maybe you want to kind of combine these things together in some way during a scene. And even if it doesn't work out the first time, even if you try something and you're like, oh no, this totally isn't for me, I hate whips or whatever, there are so many different implements, there's so many different materials, and there's so many different types of scene energy and different, types of ways you can do this kind of play. Like you can be in bondage while you do it or not in bondage. You can do like a takedown scene, you can do an abduction scene, all sort of different ways to frame and experience these types of play. Like even if you find out, well, like, oh, I don't really like being flogged while I'm tied to a St. Andrew's cross. Maybe you really, really love Hojojutsu. Maybe you really, really like being, partially suspended from coconut rope and whipped at the same time. There are so many different ways that you can combine all of these things, and maybe you just have one specific thing that really works for you. And one last thing that I want to make sure to cover before I wrap up this video is, do you have to know right away if you're a masochist? And I guess what I mean by that is, can you become a masochist? Do you have to be born as one, or is it something that can be taught? And this is something that people tend to go kind of back and forth on. I personally believe that you can be a masochist and learn how to like it. It involves a lot of unraveling of everything that society has taught you and your past experiences and your own like mental baggage and all of that. But I think even if at first you don't know how to enjoy pain, you can learn how to enjoy it. And maybe you're not a natural masochist, but you can teach yourself. You can do that through learning how to process pain. You can do that through, learning how to develop a certain kind of scene energy, how to reach subspace through other means, and then incorporating more of an SM aspect. There are a ton of different ways you can learn how to enjoy pain. I personally find the best method is just finding a pain processing method that works the best for you. And through that, you'll be able to find more enjoyment. It's also really helpful when you have a partner who really enjoys it too, because then you have sort of this, I don't want to call it like an energy where you're giving up your own needs to meet other person's needs, but it is very much helpful when you have somebody who's like encouraging you and wanting you to be able to learn how to enjoy this, to kind of guide you through that process. If you guys are interested in pain processing, I may make a video about it in the future. I actually took a class on pain processing a couple months ago, which was really, really insightful and helpful. If I can, I will link the notes for that class down below, or at least like something about pain processing and different pain processing methods. But as always, if you guys have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave that down in the comments section below. And you guys can find me on all of my various other social media. I have a Tumblr, Instagram, if you want to interact more. Those will be linked down in the description box. If you guys like this video and want to see more like it, please do consider going to my Patreon. It really, really, really does help. And I am so thankful for all the support I've been getting recently. I will be linking my Patreon down in the description box below, as well as a little thing during the end screen. But that is pretty much everything. So until it's time, have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.